Okay, so that's the take-home test. So let's get started with the lecture today. Today I want to talk about success breeds success dynamics, or in the literature you also come across this in other contexts. We call it sometimes the Matthew effect or cumulative advantage. They refer to more to the same phenomena in a more broader sense, not necessarily related to success, but all to the way of where somebody who has something gets more because they already have something. That's like the kind of dynamic that we have there. So, but I find it quite interesting to think about success, because I like to think about that also because I want to tell you, like, what can you do or what should you do to be successful? Not just with a module or with university, but, in life. So how do you become successful? What do you do? What do good people really do? And when I'm at conferences and I meet some really clever people, I always look at what do they do? What do they do? Well, first of all, the one thing I realize is that very good people, they don't do anything different than what you do. They do exactly the same thing. I sometimes wonder they have like a magic pill or whatnot, but they don't. It really is just a lot of hard work, sitting down, doing the readings, going through it, and so on and so forth. And oftentimes the result that you see is, for example, when you read a paper, right? You read, for example, until today, you had to read the Van der Rohe paper in PNAS, which is, by the way, also relevant for the take-home test. So all readings that you had to do until now, including for the one for today, is relevant for the take-home test. You read a paper like that, or a paper in AGAs, and they're just very clear. They're very straightforward in a way. You wonder, wow, those guys are really good in it. But that's actually the result of a lot of work that went into it. So for every finished, polished piece of work that you read, some of it took years in the making to get to that point. So, and a lot of the times there are detours and going in the one or the other direction, and that's just how it goes. So there's no secret in being successful. It's really just keep going at it, being consistent at it. And also one of the things, and I have put this on here because it's one of my childhood idols, Michael Jordan. I was playing basketball a lot when I was younger. And he kind of put something to the point that I think is quite relevant as well. So he emphasizes the role of failure. So I noticed that maybe you guys, and I noticed some cultural differences here as well. There's a different way of dealing with failure here than elsewhere. But I always find it incredibly annoying when I go somewhere, give a talk at a conference, and everybody loves what I do. I think this is a waste of my time because I go there to get better. Right? So if I once went to a conference, I flew around half of the world, there are two people raising their hands, and one guy said something that I already knew, and the other guy, he didn't listen properly. And that's a waste of my time. So you want to get into the habit of failing. It's kind of really odd, it's counterproductive, because if you don't fail, you cannot get better, right? So becoming good and being successful is not about never making mistakes. That's ridiculous. Nobody makes that. It's about developing an ability to fall down, get up, and learning from those mistakes. That's what makes you become really good. That's what makes you successful and so on. So anyway, so Michael Jordan, he said, I failed over and over again in my life, and that's why I succeed. And I think there's really something to it. It's just a habit of, and when you ask me, so what do the really successful people do? I look at it in my discipline, academics, and on what do they do different. They don't do anything different. They're just better in getting up again. That's the thing. It's not about never falling down. It's about getting up again and learning from your failures and becoming better at it. So actually failing something is a really good thing for you. But that's sort of a very different mindset, but think about it in terms of improvements. Anyway, so this is just some general stuff about success. But now about the lecture today. So what I want to talk about, I want to start with two observations that we make in relation to success, then something about some crazy sports, Matthew effects, and then lastly, I want to talk about this field experiment, which was the required reading for today. So when we look at success as well, what do we observe? Well, we observe that most of us have little success, while a few people have a lot of it. A lot of it. And by that I mean it's not sort of in a way that there's an average amount of success that people have, and some people have a little more and other people have a little less than that. No, actually this distribution of success often looks a bit like this. And this is what we will call a power law distribution. It's not a distribution that looks a bit like that or like that, but it's like boom. And it's like a curve. And when you look at the number, let's say on the one axis, on the x-axis, you have the total number of people. It's like how many people are there. On the y-axis, you have, let's say, how well they perform or how successful they are. And then this graph shows us that a small number of people have a lot of success. Okay? You go a little bit on the right, and actually you're very high up. So a small number of people have a lot of success, while a lot of people, when you go to the very right, have very little success. So that's one observation that we make, that this success seems to be not normally distributed. It's sort of distributed by this power law. And these kind of things should always ring a bell when you observe such distribution, because that means something is going on here. So that's the first observation that we have. So why could that be? Well, maybe some people are just more special than others. I don't know, maybe they just have high talent or something like that. But then again, that kind of wouldn't really explain why this should be distributed in such a weird way. Right? I don't know, there should be some people that are more really talented, but why are there so much talent out there, and then most of us don't have talent at all? So that doesn't seem to explain it in a way. So you could think about, I don't know, people doing something special in a way, but that doesn't explain it. Yeah? The second observation that we make when we look at success and how success comes about is that there seems to be an acceleration in how successful people are. It's not that this sort of is steadily successful. It's not that you become steadily a music superstar. That's not how it goes. You kind of you tingle around in some bars in Dublin for a little bit, I don't know, and then at some point you maybe get a gig elsewhere in London or so on, and then boom, you get a record label, and then you are in the charts in a way. So it's not that this sort of goes like that. Yeah? So this is not a linear development. So often there's sort of like a takeoff. It really takes off. It's like a boom, and suddenly, I don't know, and nowadays you guys notice that, I don't know, when you look at social media, that's sort of how things go there as well. So oftentimes you post something and nobody really cares about, and then maybe sometimes you post something and boom, it gets retweeted, it gets sent all over, and then it really kicks off in a way. It's not that this is sort of like a linear thing, right? Or that you generally, sometimes, I don't know, and sometimes you think you posted something really funny, but nobody seems to care. And sometimes you post something that you think is ridiculous and everybody seems to like it. I don't know, it's really odd. But again, there's like something beneath that, yeah? And that's like an observation that we make here. First of all, the unequal distribution of success, and the second one is that this seems to be really taking off in a way. Yeah? And you could say, okay, maybe there's a learning curve, maybe there are some unobserved temporal processes, and so on, that you just learn over the time, but it wouldn't really cut it. It doesn't really explain it. And you see what I'm trying to do? I'm trying to find explanations for how could we explain this, but then and that's the first thing you need to do, like, I don't know, a reality check, you have an observation, like, how could this become about? Is this actually really a puzzle in a way? But actually, it seems to be a puzzle, It is actually, we cannot really explain this all with a learning curve, that suddenly I learn how to become better in posting something funny and so on. Because then I do have success and then suddenly I don't anymore. It's really odd. So these are two observations that we start with, and they sort of pave the way for this Matthew effect that I want to talk to you about today. But before we get further, I have another example that kind of is a little odd. So I want to talk about sports, or more precisely about hockey. And this actually comes from a book chapter that Malcolm Gladwell wrote in a book called Outliers. I don't know if you know the guy. Does anybody know Malcolm Gladwell? He writes these nice books that you find at the airport. He wrote a book called The Tipping Point. He wrote another book called Outliers. He wrote another book called Blink. And he's a journalist, so the guy knows how to write. And they read actually really nice. It's the kind of readings you want to read, I don't know, on a flight or elsewhere, or they're not hard readings, but at the same time the guy really covers all these articles, the science behind it, right? And he has all the references to it in the back, so you can actually look it up later on. But he's a great storyteller in a way, right? So he kind of tells this story from about this other guy who went to this hockey match in Canada, and this was like the Memorial Cup final, which is the final of the high school hockey competition in the whole of Canada. So this is big. I don't know if you've ever been in Canada. This is massive. Yeah? This is like the two best high schools in the whole of Canada playing against each other. So this guy went there and you know, at this club final, and when you go there, you actually get a leaflet of, you know, like a program for the day with some information about the teams, and there's also information about the roster of the players. And this is now the roster of the Metzenhead Tigers. It was one of the teams that played in that game. And you see there's the name. Can you read it? Barely. Yeah. There's the name, there's the position, LR, left or right-handed, height, weight, birth date, and hometown. So this guy looked at that, and now I want you to do the same thing. So I have a little exercise for you right now, where I want you to take 2 minutes to look at this roster and to see if you find anything unusual in this roster. So feel free to talk to people next to you, but look at it if you see something that strikes you. Yeah. Make it bigger. Yeah. Hang on, let me see if I can get this. That doesn't make it better. No, it doesn't. So now we lost a few, but different places. Yeah, you know, think about it. This is the #1 high school team in Canada, so probably some helicopter parents ship them throughout the country or so on. I don't know.
That's still weird.
Yeah.
Because they're all from different places.
Yeah. So different places. Anybody notices something else? Yeah, you know, some are left-handed, right-handed, maybe, I don't know, but not really, to be honest. If we would look at this statistically, you know, we wouldn't see a difference, you know what.
There's some people from different provinces. It was the same high school.
People from different provinces, yeah, that's true, but it's not really what I want to get to. Okay, so what we actually do observe, if you zoom in on the birth date of those guys, if you'd have looked a little closer to it, you see when they were born, and now I'm going to show you a graph which looks really, really odd. So this is when they were born, those players. This is the roster where they were born. And now I split it up into 3-month periods. So 13 players of that team roster were born between January and March. And notice actually these are sort of not all in the same year, right? There's different years. But over half of the players were born between January and March. And when you look at, there's only 2 players that were born that have their birthday between October and December. That's a little odd. Yeah?
Is it to do with playing cut-off dates? So if when you're younger, you're the oldest on the younger team rather than the youngest on the older team?
Well, we get to that. We get to that. But keep in mind, these are different years, right? So they were born in different years. And now, this is now a graph from the minor hockey league in Canada. So this is now not, this is like an overall graph of all player in minor league hockey, which is like a lot. And what you see over here is like, look at the black bars compared to the gray bars, which is really just what we would expect to find, you know, given when people were generally born, the population. I don't know, because sometimes there are more people born in certain months than in others in a way, right? But what we do observe here is also, we observe the same thing, that most players who seem to be in professional hockey seem to have been born in the first half of the year. So this shows now, you know, we observe something, right? We observe something that is a little odd, and actually this is a great puzzle because it's really odd, right? But at the same time, it's not a fluke, and there's something very sociological behind it, which is very general, which is a little bit to what you talked about. So now I have another graph. This is now data from the NHL draft. This is sort of where new players get into the professional hockey in North America, and it shows for each of the years, how many, I don't know, how many, what's the share of the people that were born in the first quarter of the year. So when you go, I don't know, the data 2010, I don't know, around 40% of the players who joined the NHL, who were drafted into NHL, were born in the first 3 months of the year, while only around 10 or 15% were born in the last quarter of the year, regardless of their age, regardless of at which year they were actually born. Okay, so this is not a fluke. This is not a fluke. So there seems to be something going on about being born at the beginning. So the question now is, what is there? Is there something about being born at the beginning of the year that makes people better at hockey? And you see where this can't be a physical, biological cause for that. You know, there's no reason why the people that are born in January should become better hockey players. They are not by default stronger, you know, than people who were born in December. You know? It doesn't make sense. There's nothing there. So there needs to be something else that is going on, something that is beyond nature. So something that is sort of about the upbringing of people. You know, something about how how society produces a professional hockey player. Okay. So now we're talking about the cutoff dates, and that's sort of where this starts. There's a cutoff date. So, you know, you're born in January, you play with other kids who were born in that calendar year, right? So you play in one cohort, and the cohort is defined from 1 January to 31st of December. And I don't know how it is with Gaelic sports. Somebody told me it changed at some point, which actually would make it great to study. I know when I grew up, I was with other kids in the school class, in the cohort, and the cohort was from July to June. So everybody who was born in that year, we were in the same school year, in the same school class. And probably in Ireland it's the same, I don't know. But when there was sport competition, it was sort of like a different thing. Like the cutoff points was the calendar year. And because I was born in March, so I actually I always had to get fewer points to get the medal compared to my friends who were born in December. Right? Even though we were in the same cohort, we were judged according to different scales, to different point systems, because the point system was in tune with the calendar year. Okay, so in Canada, the cutoff birth date for hockey leagues is also from January to 31st. And now you think, okay, but when players are 20 years old, when they go into NHL, it doesn't really matter anymore. You know, like, I don't know, if you were born half a year earlier or later, it doesn't, I don't know, they're all physically fit, you know, it doesn't really make a difference anymore. But when you are 5 years old, 1 year makes a huge difference. Imagine I have like a 5-year-old nephew, and the guy is pretty much a bully, you know, because he's like a big guy. It's like, whoa. And then I see some other kids in his kindergarten, you know, he runs over them pretty much. Because the guy is half a year older or so, you know, but it actually makes a huge difference. And I don't know, he got some genes from his dad and his mom as well. So he's like a big guy. But it makes a big difference. Yeah? So the guy is dominant when it comes to physical sports, anyway, just because he's bigger to begin with. So at 5 years old, it makes a big difference. So when you are, let's say you were born on the 1st of January, and you're competing in hockey in Canada, well, as I just said, that's the cutoff date. So actually everybody you will play against with will be younger than you. Some people up to a year younger, up to December. Other people may be born in June, July, or so on, but they are all a few months younger than you. And at that age, up to 1 year's difference actually makes a big difference. Okay, and now something interesting comes into play, because you could say, okay, well, these kind of things, they grow out, yeah? They should grow out after a while, you know, like the physical advantages and so on. But this leads to some interesting dynamics that now kick in. Because when you're playing hockey in Canada and you're dominating the game, you know, when I'm thinking about my nephew and he's going to dominate his playground, I don't know, or somewhere else, and there's a scout watching kids about who's playing well, right? In order to provide additional support, to get them into better teams, to get them better coaching, and so on, to give them scholarships later on, and these kind of things. Who do you think is going to get the better training? Who's going to get spotted by the scout? Well, the person who kind of seems to stick out from the cohort, And at that age, it's actually the guys that kind of were born earlier during the year. So, and now these dynamics kick in, that then these kids, they get more put into more competitive teams. They will get better coaches. They will have more chances to play and practice, and they actually it becomes more a part of their life because they from the very get-go, compared to the people that they are measuring themselves against, they are more successful to begin with, in a way. So this is sort of like an example where a small advantage then actually accumulates. Yeah? It accumulates in ways that it leads to some other behavior, to some other support, and so on. And that kind of, or another example is when you play basketball. So I had like some friends. One friend, the guy was just really tall, right? He couldn't play basketball at all, but he was really tall. So everybody thought, well, you should play basketball. So we teach the shit out of that guy, right? Because we go, okay, just stand there and just throw it in, But he got much more attention than other players. Simply because he was tall to begin with, in a way. And that kind of actually made him become then a better player at the end, because he practiced a lot. And now this is a slide just to show you that this is not a fluke to hockey either, which makes this a fascinating puzzle, because it's very general. So we observe that in soccer. So now you see, now it's not split up into quarters, but into thirds. And what you see at the top right is that 76% of players in junior soccer in the Czech Republic, for whatever reason, there's the data, I don't care. But almost 3/4 of the players who are in soccer in the Czech Republic, according to this data, were born in the first 4 months of the year. Yeah. And in other sports, you see the same thing. So the green area is always the first, in this case, it's the first third. So your intuition would be, okay, it should be a third each, but it isn't. So it's actually very, very, very prevalent in other sports and other things as well. So what is going on here? Well, I already outlined the dynamic in the case of hockey, but this is a more general phenomenon, and we call that the Matthew effect. Actually, we also call it the Monopoly effect. If you ever played Monopoly, you know why it's called the Monopoly effect. Because it's a bit like when you kind of, at the very beginning, you kind of land on the right streets and you buy them and you buy the hotels. It's just going to get worse for the other players. It's not going to change, because it's so much harder for the player who kind of has a slight disadvantage at the beginning of the game to make that up, because you already have you already own the major roads, you already own the hotels and because of that, the other players are likely to land there and to pay you even more than you would have to pay them. So this is a phenomenon where having something increases your chance to get even more. And it's called the Matthew effect. And you find it as a Matthew effect in the literature. It's like the most general thing. And as also Robert K. Merton, you had to read a text from him for this Tuesday. He also wrote the paper on the Matthew effect. I have it on the extended reading list. So it's also very interesting. So he was a great guy anyway, Robert Merton. It's like one of those sociologists. You think, wow, this guy was really thinking about stuff. Not only did he think about the self-fulfilling prophecies, but he also thought about the Matthew effect in detail and kind of outlined it and how it actually works. But there's this quote from the Bible, Matthew 25:29. I don't know, these odd things for everyone who already has, he shall get even more, and those that have not, they shall be taken away, It's a very Christian thing to say and a very Christian thing to find in the Bible, but it's actually there. So this is where it comes from. So it has some other names in the literature as well. In sociology, we sometimes call it cumulative advantages. So cumulative advantages accumulate. Path-dependent increasing returns, first mover advantage, positive feedback loops, monopoly effect, halo effect, preferential attachment. In different contexts, preferential attachment refers to it in the context of networks, for example, something that I often study, where people who already have lots of connections are even more likely to get more connections. It's a bit like, people who already have lots of followers on Twitter, they're even more likely to get more followers on Twitter, because they're popular. So you follow them in a way. So it kind of adds, and that's another nice example where if you would plot the number of followers that people have on Twitter or Instagram or elsewhere, again, it's not like normally distributed, where there's an average amount of followers in a way. No, it's very much like a power law, where some people have like tons of followers, millions of followers, right? And then you have other people like me who just have their mom who follows them. Okay. So Merton, he talks about the Matthew effect. He says the Matthew, and in this paper, in this 1968 paper, he kind of observed it in the context of science. And, but he also then describes it in a more general way. So he observed it in science that suddenly some people who seem to get a lot of attention through citations, or like folks like me, I can choose who I'm going to talk about in this lecture. But I talk about some people, right? I don't know, I want to talk about the Van der Rohe studies and things like that, and that's sort of what he observed, that some people they seem to be successful, and then they get even more citations later on. Even more people read them because everybody seems to think that that's the hottest thing, I don't know. So read those guys, talk about them. So he says the Matthew effect, and in science, consists in the accruing of greater increments of recognition for particular scientific contributions to scientists of considerable repute, and the withholding of such recognition from scientists who have not yet made their mark. One thing where you observe that is when somebody wins the Nobel Prize, their books, they get sold like crazy. And actually it becomes a curse for some people because everything they say suddenly becomes super important. They cannot say any bullshit anymore because everybody is going to record it. Everybody is going to listen to, okay, what does Krugman say about the economy right now? What does Stiglitz say about the economy and so on? So that's sort of a thing where we observe that. Actually, I have a funny Nobel Prize story, so maybe this is the moment to tell it. So a couple of years ago, I met Thomas Schelling when he was still alive. So he won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2005. And we had invited him over. I was still working in Sweden, so he came to our institute to give a talk. And so a friend of mine didn't really, I don't know who was managing. He just didn't connect the dots. Yeah? So he was talking with Thomas Schelling and his wife, and there was just a royal wedding going on. Like one of the princesses in Sweden just got married, and so they talked about that. And then Thomas Schelling says, "Oh yeah, I once met this princess. I once had dinner with her." And then so my friend, he was just more concerned about the princess. He just thought, okay, where did you meet the princess? How does it actually work? When you meet the royal family and so on. And then Thomas Schelling's wife steps in and says, "Oh, a couple of years ago, Thomas, he won this prize, and we were in Stockholm before." And then later on we thought, yeah, that was the Nobel Prize. So, I didn't talk too much to Thomas Schelling on that day because I actually had a terrible cold. And I felt like the guy, he was 85 years old at the time. He died a year later. So I thought, I'm coughing, and I might be the guy who kills Thomas Schelling. So I didn't talk too much in it. But at the same time, I also didn't know what to say. I don't know. In these kind of situations, sometimes I don't really know what to say. Sometimes people are better in that. I stand there and, what am I going to say that makes sense to this guy? I don't know. What important thing do I have to say? All I would do right now is just to impress the guy, and he would know that. He gets that all the time in a way. So I just stand there, and I was just looking and thinking, hopefully I don't give him my virus. Okay, so we observe that in many other contexts as well. So when you go to, academics who come from highly prestigious universities, suddenly they get more recognition. It's actually true. So when you show up with a name tag that has a fancy university written on it, so I experienced it myself, people there are more people that come to your talk, and more people seem to listen to you because they think, okay, this must be a great guy. We observe it in another context. So this is where you might come across it, like the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. You heard about that. But that's also the Matthew effect. Although it was originally developed, or looked at in terms of scientific careers, the Matthew effect is a very general mechanism for inequality across any temporal processes in which a favorable relative position leads to even more gain. And in the economy, this is a phenomenon we observe all the time. If you have capital nowadays, you can generate more money out of that because you can invest that, which actually increases inequality. So if you read Thomas Piketty, The Capital, you actually know that. So capital kind of produces even more capital afterwards and leads to more and more inequality. Okay, so this is a general Matthew effect. But again, it becomes interesting. How do we study these things? We can observe that. We can look at the roster, of a high school team. And this is sort of where your research starts. This is sort of, I'm always excited about these kind of things. As a good sociologist, you need to observe the world. You need to observe the world. You need to look out for these kind of things. You always need to question, like, okay, so what is odd here in a way, right? Or hang on a moment, why is that the case? But then how do we study that? So now I want to talk about Arnold van der Royd, who's actually not that much younger, not that much older than me, but he's like one of my superstars. So I really like the guy. He's also a really nice guy. So and also I really like his research. He's in Florence at the moment, but he used to be in the States. And he conducted some field experiments to study these kind of dynamics, the success breeds success dynamics. And I think the field experiments are very straightforward, very crisp again, to bring home the point. So we kind of had this hypothesis, with colleagues, that success breeds success hypothesis. This claims that the ultimate success of selected person may be born out of the small random initial advantages that grow ever larger through runaway positive feedback. When you think about that, that's kind of an interesting point. He says that some people are successful not because they're good, but just because for whatever random reason, they had a little bit of success first, and that sort of kicked off these dynamics. And then they became really, really successful because of that. Because there was like this reinforcing dynamic of making successful people even more successful. Well, think about it, for whatever reason, somebody, I don't know, likes some stuff that you post, right? I don't know, or follows you, and you have suddenly 1,000 followers, and other people think, wow, this guy has 1,000 followers, I should follow this guy. And then it kind of goes on. And sometimes you might wonder, is that actually true? That there's some random perturbation at first, and that kind of makes one person successful, and then the next person successful at it as well. I don't know, these are Bush Sr. and George W. Both were presidents, where you could say, is there something that kind of might lead to success? So Arnaud and colleagues, they went out and said, hang on, can we increase the likelihood of success in the future by making things artificially successful in the present? So can we kind of make something look successful right now, and then check how successful it actually becomes after that? So here's Arnaud to have a little video about where he talks about this research.
So one hypothesis that we had was a fuzzy sociological hypothesis. We thought that it is the positive karma, if you will, the positive sentiment, the appreciation that is being expressed by one editor of Wikipedia to another that motivates the editors, that gives them a sense of community. And this is a fuzzy sociological explanation, but in this particular day and age, these fuzzy sociological explanations can be tested. For example, in Wikipedia, we were able to put our finger on exactly what the transmission of positive sentiment is, because there are very concrete items in the web logs of Wikipedia that denote the giving of such a thing. For example, there is a Barn Star. This is an unofficial award that one editor can give to another as a token of appreciation that says, thank you very much for your contributions. And this Barn Star is a signature that we can track, because the volume of Wikipedia is freely available online. And so we can look at the Barn Star and see what happens to productivity before and after that Barn Star. Now, when you look at the records of Wikipedia, typically what you see is that there's a spike in contribution volume followed by decay. And at the top of that spike is where the Barn Star occurs. So that would suggest that the Barn Star has a counterproductive effect, whereby the productivity goes down after the Barn Star. Now, the problem with observational data is that we cannot tease out cause and effect. We do not know if the Barn Star caused the decline, or if that decline was going to happen anyway. And that was maybe just a spike that led to the Barn Star. In order to disentangle these, we need to perform an experiment. And so that's what we set out to do. We went into Wikipedia as editors, and we handed out Barn Stars to individuals who deserved them. But we handed them out after we first flipped the coin to decide if the individual is going to be in the control group or the experimental group. So that means that we have two identical populations in expectation, control group and experimental group. Only the people in the experimental group get the Barn Star. And now, if we look at productivity after the Barn Star, we should be able to see if there is indeed a positive or a negative effect of receiving a positive token of appreciation. So here's a graph to the left of me. We see two curves again. A red curve that is here at the bottom. The x-axis is time, the y-axis is contribution level, and what we see is that the cumulative productivity goes up to the point where we give the Barn Star, this vertical line over here, and then increases but only slightly. This is contrasted to the blue line, which up to the giving of the Barn Star overlaps with the red line, because they are identical groups and because nothing has distinguished these people yet. But then the people in the blue group who do get our Barn Star, they exhibit heightened levels of productivity as indicated by this higher curve. And so this illustrates that with the experiment we were able to find the opposite effect. It is indeed true that positive rewards increase contributions levels, and these are an informal money system, if you will. There's informal tokens of appreciations that that's basically substitute what in other markets or other systems is money, and it helps people stay motivated and contribute all that Wikipedia content, and in the end produce a worldwide encyclopedia that is used by many people, and all they need is an internet connection. And so these two projects illustrate some of the new things that we can do with big data and with these new research opportunities. So one hypothesis that we had was
and because they've done this in Wikipedia, when you kind of they publish this paper in PNAS, which is an amazing journal, Nature Science, PNAS in a way. It's very general, it's not just sociology, social science in a way, it's very general. So they've done this experiment not just with Wikipedia, but also with other websites. So I also went on to Kickstarter. Does anybody know Kickstarter? It's still a thing today? Yeah. So Kickstarter, it's like a crowdsourcing platform where you can put on a project, something you say, I want to create a new lunchbox in a way, I need that much money, and people can pledge money to it to support it. Yeah. That's sort of like just getting support for all sorts of projects. Some are projects like, I want to help people farming in sub-Saharan Africa, somewhere in this village or something like that, or I want to have this new product idea I want to do, it's where you can kind of get crowdfunding. It's a crowdfunding platform. They've done that there as well. And what they've done is they looked at projects that didn't receive any funding up to a particular point in time, and that only had a certain amount of time left, and then they artificially gave money to it. Yeah? It's kind of a great design. They actually gave money to those projects on Kickstarter, between 1% and 10%, depending on how much it was. Right? So they just said, okay, I pledged 10% to the project, even though I don't really care about that project. I'm just interested to see whether me giving you $10 at this particular moment makes other people more likely to give you also $10 or some more money. That's exactly what they found. They also used a website called Opinions. Opinions doesn't exist anymore. It's like a website of online reviews. Again, where people could write reviews about a computer or something else. Like the stuff that you now find on your Amazon, where people kind of write their comment about a product. And then what they've done there, they kind of gave artificial good ratings to those reviews. Again, not really caring about what they wrote, just to see about how that affects other ratings that people give to it later on. So in the Wikipedia stuff, you've seen that, but they also used a platform called change.org, so like online petitions, where again, they found like petitions and at random, that didn't get any support yet, and then they subscribe to those petitions, basically saying, yeah, I support that, even though they didn't. And you see, this is sort of like the experimental part, where they basically select a set of petitions, and half of them, they get the subscription, they get saying the support, yes, I like it, while the other half doesn't, in a way. And then you can compare those about how they evolve later on. So they've done these things, donate money to random projects, or give that is not helpful rating, or giving the award, that's what Anna was talking about, or add a signature to petitions. And in all four cases, they observed that when they bestowed artificially success onto these kind of things, they actually saw more success later on. So at the end of the observation period, the Kickstarter project, where I randomly gave $10 at the beginning, actually became more successful compared to the ones in my control condition that had the same features where I didn't give the $10. So regardless of my $10, it didn't get some other dollars either. And that's a graph in the paper, but it really just summarizes this over time, with the observation period, and you compare the solid lines against dashed lines, and then you see how successful these things are. So like, for example, the blue one is the Kickstarter project. Kickstarter, where the blue line is like how successful the ones are the projects that received the funding at the beginning compared to the ones that did not receive the funding at the very beginning. As it turns out, in the Kickstarter case, which is very interesting, it even leads to the fact that when you kind of, they could, on average, giving $1 at the beginning kind of led to $1.15 more that the projects got. So if you're a clever investor, you actually pledge to yourself, because it actually makes other people pledge to it as well, and you actually get more out of it than what you kind of invested in the first instance. So it's a great experiment because there's some causal evidence for these things. You know, that's always like the big question. How can we find causality in something? How can we know that one thing leads to the other? So there's causal evidence for success dynamics in the variety of these domains. It's a very nice paper. Read the methods. There you actually see the kind of questions that they really need to think about. How do you make decisions about that? How do you study that? And strategic actors could effectively invest in positive feedback. You know, there's a market for purchasing positive reviews and endorsements. And nowadays, you know, that's what happens. Nowadays, you can buy your clicks from somewhere in the world. You know, I don't know how it works. Some bots, or I don't know, people sitting in a farm somewhere and click your likes. And actually, it might be a good strategy because it actually makes you then more likely to receive even further attention later on. I had a little example, but we don't have time for that anymore, you know, where I wanted to think about other examples for that. So do the take-home test, do it, but we also have a reading for Tuesday. It's also a very fascinating reading. Again, it's like a little experiment, like a field experiment about the spreading of disorder. And actually, when you read that thing, you can think about it because I repeated that experiment last year on the UCD campus and we got exactly the same results. So I might actually show you the results from our experiment for this as well. Okay, good luck with the test.